Welcome to episode 2 of Metaminute, a Jurassic World live podcast where we have a chill and friendly conversation about the game. So last episode in our debut, we talked about our first impressions with the new patch and had a host of folks from MetaHub to give each of their own opinions on them. So this week, I've invited back Dwebble and Logan, along with Jung Tang, who's also a mod on our Discord, famous for refusing to create any hybrids whatsoever. This week topics, we've had quite a bit of time in our new meta. The meta tier list was put out, I think this week or last week. I think it was this week. And we'll discuss it more in depth next week. But for this week, we'll just have a discussion looking at each rarity, and we'll have a debate or agreement on those of each rarity. I don't know about any of their opinions yet, but we'll see how it goes. So let's start this off with the legendaries. Let's talk about 5 legendaries dinos in the meta at the moment. So why don't you start this off for us, Logan? What are your thoughts on them?
For me, top 5 legendaries. The first is obviously Stegodeus, just for its versatile move set and its accessibility, as well as armor and the shield. The second I chose was Alucino because it's now vastly improved with the better moves and instant charge being improved. Udacino as well for much the same reason, and it's one of the safer raptor choices. Monomamus for its speed, immunity, and evasive, and then its distracting and nullifying moves. And then my favorite, Monostego, for its 30% 30% armor, fairly fast, good health, and a lot of crit.
So I guess for me, I'd say my first pick is obviously Stegodeus. And also, we're not saying these in order. We're just grabbing a pool of different legendaries. So first one's Stegodeus. That's pretty obvious. Everyone who's used or faces Stegodeus knows how powerful this dino is. Another one I'd say is Trigodistus. Since Trigodistus, it's a very versatile dino, and it really fits my playstyle and a lot of others that I've talked with. But I know it's probably not a dino for everyone. But I still think it does its damage. It tanks. It got HP buff this patch, which helps it a lot. It stuns. It still has priority. That's a great move. Along invincibility is great. So I put Trigodistus up there, and then I'd say another one is Enkentro. Enkentro is extremely fun to use. You really have to get into your opponent's mind on this one. Enkentro really depends on how your opponent plays and how you play. It could be either terrific or disastrous. So that's another one of my picks. Another one I'd say is Tristronix. Tristronix is reliable magnet. It does have a bit more HP. It has less attack, but it's really good revenge killer in the game at the moment, along with stuff like Gorgosuchus, etc. And then my last pick, I'm not sure between Indominus Rex and Alicino, but I'd probably go with Alicino since Alicino does win a lot of pretty important matchups at the moment. Indominus still does too, but Indominus, I guess it's kind of getting more and more predictable than Alicino, and I guess Alicino is a bit more versatile at the moment. Although I personally don't use it, but just looking at its matchups and stuff, what it could do, I'd put it over Indominus. Your thoughts, Joe?
Well, for a guy who doesn't use any of the hybrids, but faces them regularly down here at Sorna, mind you, Stegod definitely ranks up pretty high on that list. The thing with Stegod is that when you're facing against lesser opponents, Stegod doesn't really need to use APR. When 2 Superiority Strike does the same thing, he can save that APR for the next matchup to deal a bit of burst damage before it finally goes down. Agreeing with Alucino, that's a no-brainer. Instant charge seems to be the meta everyone's complaining about in upper Sorna and buff, and having instant charge with defense shattering on a bruiser dino which has 106 speed, mind you, meaning it outspeeds plenty of other similar tank bruisers, is a pretty sizable advantage against a lot of matchups. If Alosino has 107 speed to tie with Indom and Stegard, it will be the end of the Stegard world as we know it. And otherwise, I pretty much agree with Monostag as outlined by Logan, Utasino outlined by Logan as. And if one of the very weird things I've noticed about Pose is that three out of his top five legendaries were tank, which I suppose is probably due to him being very, very, very much accustomed to playing tank versus tank. But I favor Triastronics over any other legendaries at the moment, simply because I'm a big chomper guy. I'd rather go and deal big damage, and Triastronics fits the bill for me here.
All right,
So,
so two monostego mentions at the moment. What's going on? Anyways, your thoughts, Double?
So I got to throw a third mention up for Montesego. Not actually, but the fourth mention definitely for Stegod. It's undoubtedly the best legendary in the game right now, if not one of the best dinos. Period. Um, I could talk for it about days about why it's good, but everybody else has already outlined that. Monomimus is another one I really like. It's frail, but it has distracting and evasive to help. It has a nice speed, and it counters Endo super hard, which is real important. And Kintro is another one I agree with. Uh, Spiky Potato is great. I love getting into my opponent's head with him and causing havoc. Alicino, another one I don't need to elaborate because everybody else has already mentioned it. It has an awesome matchup spread. I really need to start working on mine. But my unpopular opinion comes in with Dilarano. It's seen that heavy damage nerf coming into 1.4, but I feel like it's still tanky enough where it can come in, get a couple pot shots in, and swap out and be ready to come back later. 126 isn't the best speed for that, but it's generally enough to get by.
All right, so looking at the dinos we've thrown out here, the ones that we agree on, I guess we don't really need to talk too much about. Sega DS, that's a no-brainer. I'll mention too, and yeah, these are the two that we do agree on. I guess let's start talking about the one that no one else really mentioned, which are Tragodistus and Dilarano. So let's start with Dilarano. Why didn't any of us mention Dilarano? Well, um, I still think Dilarano is good, but what I find Dilarano in like this situation is that it's replaceable by probably Utah Sino and Pure Hitter in many ways. It is the most tankiest one out of the three, but it is also the one that hits the least hard out of the three. Probably my reason. I mean, it still has the best moveset out of three. It still has Purity Strike, which none of the other two have. And Greater Stunning Rampage obviously is a. But I just can't really choose out of these three, so that's why I didn't put Dilarano in mine. How about you, Logan?
For me, with Dilarano, I really like him. I think he's fantastic. But now that the unique hybrid's out and it's just a fantastic choice, there's no real reason to go past level 20 with Dilarano, which was where mine is at. So it can't really fit in the matchups I'm up against. But it has a great move set, and as you say, it is tanky. And for guys that had pushed it past level 20 pre-update, it's still very usable.
Just to add to part of my reasoning for throwing it in there, mine is sitting at level 23 because
Yeah.
once they rebuffed it after the first mistaken nerf, I thought it was safe. I expected it to see a slight nerf, not quite as hard as it ended up getting, but I'm still happy with it.
Yeah, I guess still it's still one of the better legendaries. I guess. Thoughts on this?
I'm probably gonna rehash this argument when we come down to epics and non-hybrid, but Diorano uh, doesn't really come into my mind when I first think about my top five list, mainly because it's a blue dino, you know. It's the one that comes in, tries to catch up or patches up for your loss in the advantage, and then swaps back out through impact and run to for another dino to finish the job. So it's kind of like the support you see when you're playing games. It's not the one that hard carries you, especially after the damage nerf in current patch.
Hmm. I guess that makes sense. I mean, I guess the conclusion is more or less in level 20. It probably doesn't do the best, but over level, they can find a spot on one's team, and you should definitely use it if you do have a spot on your team. So, anyways, Trago, I'm surprised none of you guys put Trago on your list. Tragodistus, I feel it's still very strong. The weakness I do see in Tragodistus is all these, defense shattering dinos that got these buffs that are more obtainable. Alicino got a buff for sure that does harm Tragodistus a bit, actually a lot. And people are getting Trico. More and more people are getting Indoraptor and stuff like a Magna that since we're getting a lot of irritator events. But I still feel it does have its place against things vulnerable to its damage output, its control mechanisms. I mean, a Rampage still does a lot of damage, still has its counter. It's still a really good dino with 124 speed, which is a pretty interesting speed tier. So, why didn't any of you guys mention Trago?
For me, Tragodistus, I still use it and he's great, but everyone knows how it works and they know how to play around him. And with the damage is okay, but it's not going to really KO too many opponents. And guys can swap in and out from it and nullify or break the shield if they need to. It's still good. It's just it's easily played around.
I would agree with that. I'm still using it on my team and it's still working for me. But part of the reason, like Logan mentioned, is when I see an enemy throw one out and I'm looking at my Magna sitting on my bench, I just start drooling because that's free food.
Is it really? Come on, it still does what? Almost 2k damage on a rampage. That's a lot.
Well, the typical scenario though, I see it come in, I get a shot or two at it, and then I'm looking either to predict a superiority, a stun, or better yet, a long invincibility, and then Magna comes in and just cleans house.
Oh yeah, that's Magna.
Um, I also feel another reason I don't really favor it so much right now is the new Alan Kylosaurus. A lot of people are
Mm-hmm.
still not agreeing with us about how good that thing actually is, but
It is
it
really
pretty
good.
much does what Trago does, and they both lose to tank busters. But I feel like Alan Kylos actually does better versus non-tank busters.
Yeah, Alan Kylo is quite slower though.
But Ankalo has its own superior strike, and Ankalo also has a short defense. So theoretically,
It's
you can
true.
pretty much keep a shield up all the time, assuming you'd survive that long.
Yeah, so Alan Kylo trades some damage output for a really consistent shield. I probably should have thought about that one more than when I was doing my list. So, anyways, should we move on to our next category, or any other disagreements you guys want to talk about here?
Why didn't you just
Really?
pick Monostego?
Because it doesn't
Yeah, I
win
thought
any
that would be on
matchups.
Cyber's list.
Yeah, that's the problem with Montego. It like for so many matchup, it needs to land that crit. a 40% crit isn't super reliable. Two turns of 20% crit. Yeah, it's quite frail. Its speed tier is super super weird. I don't like its moveset at all. Actually, that's why I don't have Montego up there at all.
I disagree a little bit. I think it's an okay dino, but like I was saying, it doesn't win any matchups. Depending on what you have on your bench, you can use it to kind of set up and give something else a setup turn when it gets to come in and revenge kill, but that doesn't always work. It does sit at a really weird speed tier, and like he said, you need one of those crits typically to win anything, and over 2 turns with that 20% crit, it has a 36% chance to land one.
Is that not Belly?
Heartbreaking. And I rely so much on Monostego at the moment, and I just cannot see how other people don't see how good it is.
Oh,
I really don't see much
that,
issues with Montego.
the other benefit I'll give it though is it's a whole lot more accessible. I feel like if you can get a hold of the Monolophosaurus to fuse into it, the other part, the Stegosera components, are pretty accessible, so you can overlevel it. In which case, it becomes great. But I don't feel like it's as nearly as good if you're looking at it from an even level perspective, which is what I was looking at when I was making my list.
Uh,
Ones?
from my
Mhm.
personal point of view, immunity dinos are a big pain when you come to the legendary tier, uh, especially when you have Endown and Monomime comes in. I know Monostack doesn't beat them one on equal levels. You guys have already hammered that point in, but I like to point out that its active debuffing at least slows them down a bit so that they don't get that much of a big lead.
Yeah,
Mm,
it can really take the momentum off your opponent. Even like so Raja, the Raja and Kylo hybrid, when it's got its long protection up and it's got its crit boost up, and then you just nullify it, and then it really puts it in a very weak spot.
I feel that's an extreme case because Raja Kylo 100% relies, like, all it has is buffs in its moveset.
Point taken. I suppose
Some
we're
other
gonna
dinos.
have to let it slide on this one. I think Mostek definitely deserves at least honorable mention in the top 5 list, but well, maybe you guys are right that it still needs a bit more buff to be able to really compete with the likes of Stegard in the current meta.
I do agree that it's nowhere on the same tier as Stegodeus, but I'll agree to honorable mention.
What I really wanted to see was that they didn't change its moveset. The moveset change is really good for it at all, giving it null impact and taking away distracting strike. That really hurt it a lot. They gave it back distracting strike and took away null impact. That'll make it way better than it is at the moment. So, anyways, any more disagreements, or should we move on to?
No, I'm happy. I agree with everything else. Yeah, I was happy with that.
All right, now let's move on. So, how about let's start with double this time?
What tier are we looking at this time?
The ones.
Apex to Abs.
Epics? Okay. Okay, so this was a really hard one to decide, I felt like. But the
Mm-hmm.
one that immediately came to my mind was Postametrodon.
Mm-hmm.
One, it looks beautiful. Look at that cell. Two, immune is great in this meta. 124 is not the greatest speed tier, but it's pretty good up there, and it functions as a tank buster. And I like the benefit that it has access to its defense shatter on turn 1 when it enters. Granted, it
Mm-hmm.
loses a little bit of overall damage output, but it lets it bust through a shield immediately, whereas some of the other ones kind of have that awkward turn where they have to set up first.
Mm-hmm.
But on that same note, I also thought Gorgasukas actually is up there. Again, tank busters are just super important in the meta right now because you have to have something to try to bust through the Stegods and Tragods and all those things that are sitting out there. And again, it's at a pretty okay speed tier. It outspeeds what it needs to, and it does a lot of damage, especially if it gets to come in and get a revenge kill. Put your opponent in a real awkward
Mm-hmm.
spot because their next Dino is probably going to eat a buffed Defense Shattering Rampage.
Yep.
Moving on from that, Stegosera. I mean, self-explanatory. You land a couple stuns. You don't let your opponent fight back. Pretty good stat line. It did see some nerfs this time, so it is weaker than before, but it's still good. Other one I really like is Blue. Raptors have kind of fallen out of the meta, but Blue has decent to cleanup potential. Has a little bit lower damage, but she makes up for it with survivability that other Raptors don't have. She can actually pull out wins due to that would surprise people. And the last one I had was actually Spinotoraptor. Bleed mechanics are really nice. Distracting Rampage, it still keeps its Raptor-esque qualities, even though it's kind of slow compared to the other ones. Yeah, it's going to lose to Superiority Strike users straight up. But other scenarios, if it's able to get its moves off, it does a lot of damage before it goes down.
Sure. So my list is actually super similar to yours. I have Posty up there, which obviously you mentioned, and Gorgasukas still up there. It did. People say it got a buff. I personally think it's a nerf, but it will do what it's supposed to do. In most matchups, it comes in ferocious and then start. It could go for rampage, and even after the rampage, it still has a 1.5 times move, which is great. It did buffs, but I think it's still a great for what it is. Stegosera, I think Stegosera really falls off compared to obviously, but I think it's still usable for what it does. It could just come in slow and then either impact on turn 2 or Greater Stunning Strike. Usually, I see a lot of people using Greater Stunning Strike. I think impact on turn 2 is better, but that's just me. And then one that I did have different from your list is Urano instead of Blue. This is it's like kind of my thing, but I still think Urano is great. It doesn't have high base damage, obviously. Its health is really good. Its speed is its speed got nerfed, but with Superiority Strike, that might not be a bad thing. So as one of the game, Greater Stunning Rampage, Impact and Run is okay. Superiority Strike is still a really nice move to have. For what it's used for, it just really excels in that. And the last one I had was Spinotoraptor 2. Spinotoraptor really feels like the post-updates Utah Sinoraptor. A lot of the same things. Obviously, Instant Charge this time got buffed, so we can't really compare that anymore. But it also had an HP buff, which it really desperately needed. Distracting Rampage on turn 1, that's then the pre-update Utah Sino, and now it has that bleed buff, so that helps it a lot. Critical Impact it's kind of a meh move, but it's better than nothing, I guess. And its speed's okay. Its biggest problem is just its health, but then again, it does have Distracting Rampage, so I'd put Spinotoraptor up there.
For me, mine is very similar again. I've got Posty in there, blue, and for the same reasons you guys have outlined. I've Stegosaurus in there as well. I think we're a wee bit hard on Stegosaurus because it does drop off once you get up the arena a wee bit, but it causes a lot of havoc and it causes a lot of people problems and a lot of frustration. The only thing I have on there that you guys don't have is I've got T Rex down there. It's
Hmm.
it's still a very very hard hit dino, and there's guys using them up in Lockwood at level 24, level 25, and they do a lot of damage. The only thing is, really, would you want it? You'd be better not taking it over 20 and stocking up the DNA. And the last thing I had down, which is maybe a wee bit strange, is Stiggy Moloch. That 129 speed is like it's really really fast, and its move set is good. It's got the benefit of instant charge, getting the one turn delay rather than two, and then can flee. Its health is pretty good and its damage is pretty good. So even in comparison to Paramoloch, there's not much of a difference in damage wise, although there's difference in moves. But I think he's a good wee choice too.
I have to admit, I legit laughed out loud and I had to mute my mic when Logan mentioned Stiggy, because we all know how Pose is gonna roll his eyes up all the way to the back of his brain.
No,
Well,
he's good, man. He's good. If you were to run into a level 23, 24 Stiggy, that would cause some trouble.
I do admit Stiggy is pretty much Orano's evil twin here, and so I guess my turn now. Surprisingly, I'm not gonna put in a fourth mention for Posty, but I do want to put in a third mention for Gorgo. One of the reasons I do not want to mention Posty is because despite what Dweb says that Posty has defense shattering impact to pull off turn one, most of the time, at least down here at the lower end of Sorna, Posty doesn't do anywhere near enough damage to actually make defense shattering impact, an impact. But Gorgo still works because Ferocious Strike still hits hard enough to clean up, and then, like what Dweb says, anything comes in will be eating a buff defense shattering rampage unless they outspeed. Fourth mention for Stegosera because that thing has been a pain in my rear end forever, ever since I got into Sorna. Uh, Rex definitely still fits the bill. Like what Logan said, it needs speed control support to really to be really able to shine. But speed control support is pretty much everywhere here in the competitive meta. Given Superiority Strike, given Stegosera, given all the Stegosauruses that are out there. So let's see. I've talked about Tree. Spinosaur Raptor definitely deserves a mention from me here, even though I never used it. To give context about how good Spinosaur Raptor is, I'm using Pyroraptor, uh, which has a much lesser move set compared to Spinosaur Raptor, despite having a faster speed. The pounce debuff and the bleeding debuff really chips away at a lot of tanks. And I'd say that's one of the reasons why Pyroraptor is said to have been receiving a really, really great buff. I used to be that Utah Raptor was better than Pyroraptor back when in patch 1.3, when Pyroraptor had only a regular impact, but now it's no longer the case. And yeah, blue definitely is on my top five epics because it's blue. Need I say anything more?
That's quite straightforward. Okay, so first of all, I think the one that we all did agree on was Stegosera, obviously, I guess. I think anyone who's listening to this has and or Stegosera in someone else. So I think we could all get that. Gorgo well mentioned, but Logan, um, care to explain why you didn't put Gorgo in there, Logan?
I just have never liked him. I've always just found him without having immunity and being as low health as he is, that he's just very easy to beat. And the idea that he has to have one turn to set up just is so situational for me that if I was to use him, I would find that it would cause me a lot of losses that a safer dino could have prevented.
Yeah, that's the reason why Gorgo almost didn't make my list. The lack of immunity really hurts it. It's super situational. Oh, I mean, I guess it's not that situational, but it gets countered by this. And now that it lost Adrenaline Surge, speed control really hurts it. I already mentioned why he didn't like Posty. About Rex, I don't know why Dweb didn't put Rex on it, but the reason why I didn't put Rex on it is I actually did want to put Rex on it. It was Gorgo for me, and I still think Rex is a really, really good dino. It's super usable. In case of this list, I didn't have it on there. What about you, Dweb?
Well, my list started out as a top 8, and I had to narrow it down. And number 6, the last one to get cut, was Rex. So definitely worth mentioning. It's great, especially if you manage to save it to last, because it's one of those dinos. It just comes in and it almost guarantees that it's going to kill whatever it's against before it goes down. It just has
Mm-hmm.
to watch out for getting revenge killed. But if you save it till late, you can't revenge kill it if you've already lost. Arano was up there. Good move set, good stats. Not much to say there. And surprisingly, I do think the sticky buffs were quite nice. I definitely think it's the weakest out of everything that was mentioned, but it has the utility with the swaps and stuns to wreak some havoc if it gets rolling.
So I guess the biggest disagreement on here is probably Arano and Stiggy. So why I personally put Arano over Stiggy, and I do agree that Stiggy did get buffed this round, but Stiggy still has to open with the normal strike. I think, but is it minimal or it's one of those? But anyways, it's not a relevant move. It still has to use that before it can do anything. The instant charge buff is nice. Stiggy, I believe, does have higher base damage, but in this game, a better multiplier is always better than base damage in most case scenarios. Greater Shining Rampage, best moves in the game, and I just think Arano has more survivability with its HP, so he could probably pull off more free damage than Stiggy can before the swap. That's why I put Arano over Stiggy.
The thing about Orano is that it relies on superiority strike, and by the time you've gotten off that greater stunning rampage, your opponent would be back to its normal speed, meaning Orano would probably get outsped again. Stiggy's one big advantage, besides from instant charge, is that it has 129 speed. It puts Stiggy on par with a lot of the Raptors and much higher than Posty and Gorgo Sukas. So for players who are debating which one to put them in their team, you gotta look at the levels and you gotta think about the speed and bear that in mind. Stiggy can surprisingly pull off a couple of revenge kills and then stun instant charge the next swap in to set up for your next dino.
Yeah, but I really don't think that's an issue with Arano because first turn, if theoretically you're facing someone that's faster than Arano, first turn you Superiority, second turn you Greater Stunning Rampage, and then third turn they go first, right? Assuming they're faster. And with Arano's really high HP, it can take two hits from a lot of things, and then on the third turn it gets Superiority again, so next turn it's faster and it throw an Impact and Run on them. So that's four moves and Dino with them only hitting you twice before you swap out. So I really don't think speed is an issue with Arano, although I would concede that 129 speed is really, really good on Stiggy. That obviously is one of the greatest advantages that Stiggy has, but I really don't think speed makes Arano worse in any way.
Post took the words out of my mouth with the mention of speed, because I think even if you use the swap on turn 3 when you're slower, it means your next dino, which you get to plan for now thanks to the changes to it, um, gets to come in without taking a free hit, even if you don't kill the opponent's dino. But when comparing the two, I think it really depends. Do you need speed on your team? Do you want late game cleanup? If so, you pick Sticky. If you want something that can tank and can maybe you can throw out in a pinch situation when you don't really know what to use, Arano's your girl. So
Mm. Any other thoughts before we uniques, I guess?
Yeah, I'm good.
So this one, unique. So let's just do 3. So let's talk about top 3 uniques. How about this? I'll start. Personally, for me, the best 3 uniques are Indoraptor. That's one. The second, and the third one I'd say is uhhh. So Indoraptor, for me, why I think it's still really good. It obviously isn't 1.2 Indoraptor. 1.2 Indoraptor is the best dino in the history of this game. That's just a crazy monster. But the reason why I still think it's good, 128 speed with defense stratting Rampage. That does a lot of damage. It also has an impact on turn 1 that is cleansing. So although it doesn't have immunity, it still has cleansing, and you could. It still has armor piercing strike as its basic strike. Armor piercing strike isn't bad. It has okay HP, I'd say, for what it is. Super hard hitting. I know 1.4k base damage is among the hardest hitting game. It also has evasive stance, which you can use, especially against the Stego DS matchup. You'll have to use evasive stance, and that gives you a decent edge in that matchup. Where if you didn't have evasive stance, you'd probably lose to Stego DS's, and just insult to injury to your opponent, it has a 20% crit, which, they have an extra 20% crit on an already amazing dino, but apparently they do. And next one I want to talk about is Dialorachyrus. 129 speed is phenomenal. I'd argue the single strongest moveset in the game, which is obviously the same as Dialorano, but I'd say obviously its damage is higher. 129 speed is phenomenal. It doesn't have too much HP, but that has never been a problem for me when using this dino. It has about game-changing dinos. This dino has rolled every single time I have rolled this in my team, and it's just a phenomenal dino. And uhhh, I guess, I'm assuming will be on a lot of people's list just because of its just huge buff. It has really decent damage. It has that instant charge buff, so it doesn't have to go to like normal strikes, or it doesn't have to use a normal strike on turn 2 before it could do anything. It still has Distracting Rampage, a phenomenal move. Has impact and run, so uhhh I'd say is also among the top 3. So how about Logan? What are your thoughts on the uniques?
A lot of agreement. Indoraptor definitely, for all the reasons you've said. It's also still quite accessible. There's very few people that will have any other unique before Indoraptor. The only issue I'm having with it at the moment is in a lot of matches it's whoever has the highest Indoraptor wins, and it's a wee bit annoying. But uhhh takes annoying to a different level at the moment because it's just so broken. It's Distracting Rampage is enough to do enough damage to really hold you back, and then instant charge, and then he tends to flee with a considerable amount of health left and can do that all over again. I would kind of agreed with Dialorachyrus. but I kind of really like Trico because
Hmm.
he's huge health, a lot of damage. His moveset is terrifying, but he does need to get set up. He only has a primary move as his first move, but if he gets rolling, he is very hard to stop. 30% armor, instant invincibility, 20% crit, just like in the Raptor, and his counter attack. I think he's up there too.
So you'd say Trico over Dalarchives, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Right. How about double?
Okay, well, no arguments for you to Renix. I think it's probably the single best dino in the game at the moment. Big damage, big health, utility. What more can you ask for, really?
Hmm.
It's basically last patch's Dialorano now. But moving on, I also agree with Dialorchirus. I wish it wasn't quite so frail. It's kind of scary if you suspect they might have a Stegod or something sitting in the back. But like you said, the speed tier that it sits at with its move set, it just wreaks havoc. I love being able to pull it in, maybe get a revenge kill, stun the next dino, and then run away and save it again for later because chances are they don't have multiple answers to that dino. The last one, that's where I have to disagree. Indo is really good, but I'm giving it to Magna. It's really squishy. It has its niche counters, but so does Indo. It loses to a lot of null dinos and other random things. And Magna loses to like the instant charge crew and things that outspeed it. But it's not happening all too often that you're going to see things that outspeed it at even levels. So um, having null, I think, is a huge plus for it, just because it's something that's needed at high levels. I feel like just to sweep all the buffs because a lot of top level dinos are taking advantage of, you know, evasive shields, some sort of buff that keeps them in the playing field for longer, and it's able to get rid of those.
So how about you, John?
Definitely agree with Dweb on Magna Peridot. One thing that Dweb, I think Dweb didn't mention is that Magna Peer also has its own immunity, which means the only realistic way the instant charge dinos are going to take it out is not by stunning it, but by saving the instant charge until they're pretty sure that the priority move takes out Magna Peridot. And I really like Trico on that list, but for the exact same drawbacks that Logan has just mentioned, that turn one, it needs turn one to set up before it can really start rolling. So Trico doesn't make my cut. Instead, I'm gonna go with early Dominus, looking purely from a unique versus unique matchup. Uh, a lot of dinos rely on either debuffing their opponents or cleansing their own debuff, aka superiority strike to work. But early dominus has its own minimal speed up strike, which allows it to do pretty much the same thing Dylora Kairos or Utarinex did, which is to hit hard and run away. So I think early dominus makes my top three for that list. Third one would probably be a tie between Dylora Kairos and Indoraptor. I'm leaning more towards Dylora right now. I really like that extra speed.
Mm. These are interesting. I mean, I guess the ones that. One thing, why didn't you mention you shot Rhinex, John? That's seems like a pretty strong one.
You know me. I've always been a Raptor user ever since patch 1.2, and I still use Raptors up until patch 1.4. So I have a personal distaste towards bulky dinos, and trust me, Utara NX was like fourth on the list. It just had to take the cut.
So I guess the unique that you had on your list was Erlodon. So anyone?
I don't like it. It's too squishy. It has tools to handle a whole lot of situations, but if it gets those bad coin flips when it tries to cloak, it's just done.
Hmm.
That that's kind of how I feel too. It can be devastating, but it needs to have that wee bit of luck on its side. The minimal speed up strike is excellent, but you need to really know how to be using it and when to be using it.
It also struggles really hard against shields. It just has no way to punch through them because all of its damage is just tied into Rampage and Cloak. And so shields can, pretty much know when they need to go up, and it just cuts the damage pretty hard.
Against 40% armor dinos, a cloaked rampage is just the normal rampage damage, close to that. So it really struggles against armor and shields. And one other thing is, uh, a lot of times it is forced into a situation where it has to use minimal speed up. It cuts a lot of its damage potential for me because it is in one of the worst speed tiers when it comes to the high speed dinos. 125 is the worst place it could be in, and that's why a lot of times it is that minimal speed up on turn one. And when it does use that minimal speed up on turn one, it either has to be in a revenge kill situation, or else it's going to take a huge hit. And with its frail HP, when it does take a huge hit, it's going to be hurt. I have Earldom up there. Any other dinos you guys want to discuss?
I have one that might get people hating me, but I don't think Trico competes up there, honestly. When I first made my list, I did my top 5, and it was the 3 that I mentioned: Utarenex, Dialorachyrus, Magna, and then 4th place was Indo. It very similar to Magna. It's pretty flexible. It does have its niche counters that are kind of widespread, but it can usually get the job done. And I actually gave 5th to Diaragosaurus. I love swapping Ferocity. I really like having the option to swap into a counter dino that's going to hit hard. And while Trico has counter, it's only a 0.25, so it's only doing like 400 damage. It's not really a counter when it swaps in, and then it has a bad first turn, so it kind of gets punished really hard if you try to use it in that way as well. So
Yeah. I mean, I guess the reason why I didn't put Trico on my list, I still think it's a good dino, but it really needs a setup. And by setup, I don't mean it setting up. It needs some other situation to occur either on your opponent's side or, on a really carefully planned slow on your side.
yeah, I agree.
And a lot of times it just doesn't get that opportunity.
It's a good dino for sure, but I just don't think it's as good as people are quite rating it to be.
I think it is good is when it does get into those situations, it just rolls your enemy's team. They can't do anything about it. Every other turn is a at least armor pierced rampage with huge damage plus a counter, but it really needs that setup or really needs that situation to happen. So that's why I really didn't put Trico on my list.
For me, I like him for the same reason that I like Rex. That if you bring him in the late game, you're generally going to kill something. You're going to take one kill. It is a risky dino, but with the uniques, there isn't really a bad unique. So any of these uniques could have been put on any of our lists, and there would be arguments 2 and 4.
I mean, except for Tormala. Come on, that thing. Poor thing got nerfed so hard.
No, that was a mistake. They need to fix that.
Yeah. Anything else you guys want to discuss on Unix, or are we moving on?
Just want to chime in Horomolok. Yeah, that was a huge nerf. It really unfortunate for it. I think we're definitely going to see it fixed. But even with that nerf, I think it's still a pretty strong dino. But yeah, it's definitely not going to. It's definitely the worst unique at the moment, though. Despite that.
So let's. Mm-hmm.
I mean, Toromolok pretty much has what Utara and Exodata Kairos has. A lot of debuff, some control, and then impact and run. It's
Hmm.
just that, the other two deal so much damage that Toromolok's less than 1k base damage feels like a wet
Sky,
tissue at the moment,
come.
especially when you consider its unique status.
I think, single largest damage nerf in the history of the game. That really hurts.
Sky, come here.
Anyways, moving on to next one. Top five non-hybrids. This one's interesting because the reason why we thought we'd bring it up because non-hybrids are always interesting creatures. They are generally more used in lower arenas, although there are some really super viable ones that you could use at the top. So I really just want to hear everyone's opinion on these. So how about let's start with Jung, the person that actually doesn't use any hybrids.
All right. Uh, I know this is not a popular opinion among people outside of MetaHub, probably, but inside MetaHub, this is definitely top one on my list. Postosuchus, no questions asked.
Yeah.
Rex, I'm gonna take this on non-hybrids versus non-hybrids perspective. So
Mm-hmm.
Rex definitely makes the cut too, and then Kulasuchus, totally underrated, but you should definitely look at it. It aside from not having a running attack, uh, a running move, it pretty much functions the same as a lot of other debuffers out there. You come in, you null everything they have, and then you started applying the pressure, distracting and slowing impacts. And then I probably should mention one of the Stegosauruses in it. Right now, I'm pretty torn between Werehole and Kentrol, but I think that's because my Werehole is much higher level. So I'm gonna go with Kentrosaurus on this one. Having an instant cripple with a zero point 0.5 counter gives Kentrol a lot of flexibility in situations, even though it still uh, has the lowest health among all the Stegosaurus, making it really, really frail, especially with 0% armor.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what else am I missing? I've talked about big chompers. I've talked about a slowing tank. So blue's up there on the list. I've never really used blue, but again, that's due to more of a level thing rather than a viability thing.
Mm-hmm.
Blue's definitely up here. No questions asked. Raptor, it beats Velociraptor. The only thing that's faster than it, and then it can pretty much take on everything else with short defense and pounce. And I think the final one I'm probably going to mention would be Brachiosaurus, superiority strike user with a rampage. Everyone who knew me back in patch 1.2 know that I had a thing for Argentinosaurus. Back in patch 1.2, it's the only long neck sauropod with a rampage move plus 40% crit to boot back then.
Yeah.
So, uh, but they nerfed it way down in patch 1.3 when they gave it impact instead of rampage. But I think right now with Brachiosaurus coming up, it deserves. Brachiosaurus will probably replace Argentinosaurus as that tank with a rampaging damage every other turn, which is pretty decent damage output.
All right, that's fair. So how about Logan? What are your picks?
Very, very similar. I'm surprised that anyone would think Postosuchus definitely couldn't be on the list. It's crazy. Guys are using them at very high level and they do a lot of damage. I agree with Rex for the same reasons. Blue down. I love blue. I was using blue up until a short time ago. Brecky, I don't like him, but I can understand why he's there. So I put him into. I do not like the bellow move, but it's good with superiority strike and rampage. And is it still the second highest health in the game?
Mm,
I believe
something
Was it
like
so.
that.
Pat? Is it? Yeah.
Check really fast.
I thought Apato was first and then Brachio was second.
Yeah,
But
you're
apart
correct.
from that, I was sort of I had a Rhino down, but then I also had Eudaraptor down because
You're after.
I faced a few of those the past few days, and whenever they're your team level, they really do hit extremely hard, and then can hit again the second time. But apart from that, I was just in. There's no real differences to my list.
Uh, isn't Charlie a better Utahraptor at the moment?
Yeah, I think Charlie is better. It's slightly better overall, but for accessibility wise, Charlie's not too easy to farm, whereas Eudaraptor is absolutely everywhere.
All right, that's fair. That's fair. All right.
All right, so um, yeah, I agree with a lot of what I've heard so far. Bracky is definitely
Mhm.
up there. It just has a great move set, great stats to go with it. I agree with Logan. I'm not a fan of Bello, but it has its situations where it's really good. Blue obviously has to make the list. I mean, I had her on my list for epics in general, even competing against hybrids, so she's definitely up there competing. Rex is up there as well. Tank busters are just in demand, and Rex fills the job and can come in clutch if she gets to come in really late. My last two are a bit different, I feel like, though. Arano, I just really like the utility it brings. And then Tanny, Tanny
God.
Colagrius, just
Yeah, that's a good one.
because it's so fast. This thing can compete up against the super hybrids for crying out loud. I mean, it's so ridiculously good. It plays late game cleanup like a boss. Null impact lets it counter Endo. If it's a little bit higher leveled, I think it's a 2 level advantage. It also counters Endom. Um, and then if it doesn't have nullifying impact, it has armor piercing strike, which means even if it's going down, it's not going down before it takes a chunk out of anything. It's just so
Mhm.
versatile even up there, and it's just shocking to me how good it is since it's a common dino. I just really wish Ludia would let it out of park so people could actually find it and dart it.
The reason why I, kind of screamed out loud almost there is because me and Double, we have the exact same list. I have Posasuchus, Bracky, Rex, Arano, and Tanny. Reasons I guess are quite similar to Dweb's Posasuchus. I think it's still the hardest hitter for turn one damage, unless anything really big changed.
It
I don't
definitely
think
is.
is
Nothing changed.
yeah, just a huge non armor piercing or defense shattering hitter. And Bracky HB has a rampage, has purity. Not a huge fan of Bellow, but sure it has its uses sometimes. And Rex, obviously, you could compete with all the other, like my biggest thing that I like from Rex is, unless it's a debuffer, it's a one for one dino. If for example the opponent has a really strong legendary or whatever, it's probably going to kill Rex, or no, it's probably not going to kill Rex, but Rex will kill it on turn two, and then whoever they bring in next will kill Rex. So it's a really great core buster. So if your opponent has a core dino that you can't really deal with, you could throw Rex in there and finish it off in 2 hits, and then Rex dies. But you trade off not as important on your team for something that's really a core of your opponent's team. That's why I like Rex. Arano, I think I've explained before. It's a great move set for only having 2 extra moves, other than its a basic move, which is also a really good move. Security Strike is great. Um, the health is great. I think we talked about the speed issues, and Tanny. out of tanning, but I still have to recognize how useful it is. Its speed obviously is great. It has null impact. That's really obvious reasons why Tanny is good. Um, I guess it's kind of easy to level. It is a common. You could get a lot of DNA off that, but then again, it takes more DNA to level. So I'm not super sold on it's a really easy to level dino, but it is relatively easier than the many epics, legendaries, uniques, etc. So I have Tanny on there. So before we go, this last have any disagreements or any one of our lists like, oh, that's a horrible pick? Any of those?
No, I think we were. They all sounded pretty good. Everyone chose very similar dinosaurs, and
Hmm. I mean,
I'm just all right. I'm gonna go ahead. I do realize why you guys never pick Kula, but for the listeners out there who are struggling to make hybrids, and suddenly happen to have a Kula lying around in the libraries, I really suggest that you try it out. Uh, Everyone agrees that Rex is the kind of core buster who can come and trade one for one. Well, Kula is the kind of supporting dino that can make Rex a one for two dino. So bear that in mind. Just like to chime in that uh, I think Logan puts in Utah Raptor and Charlie uh, for the critical of impact as their go-to move. A lot of dinos in the current meta with superiority strike basically means that you can't rely on bleed to really uh, apply the damage over time to kill off your opponent dino. Oftentimes you have to rely on big damage off the bat, and Utah Raptor and Charlie has a 45% crit on critical impact, which helps them out against tanks that I don't know. Not sure how to describe this. Critical impact probably helps secure that kill, where other stuff wouldn't.
Mm. I mean, I guess I agree. Kula just barely didn't make my list. A few other dinos that barely didn't make up my list. Just kind of want to just throw out there. I won't explain too much. Is Erlico is one. Erlico Gen 2 is another. Rajasaurus is a nice one. Baryonyx could have made it. It's probably more lower on the list though. And then another one I want to say is Alanka. I think it's a great dino. Its moveset is great. It doesn't do too much damage, but that's not a super big issue for it since that's really not its function. Delta is actually a raptor I really like. I can pounce and then run. That's quite unique for what it does. The two Spinos I think do great as long as they don't get cleansed. They output a lot of damage, and that's this category. So yeah, before we finish, Logan and do I have any other last words on this category?
it's not a style of playing that I would personally want to try, but I have respect for anyone that does. I would find it very difficult, but there are a lot of good dinos in, and even making this list, I saw that there is a lot more options than I would have thought. I thought it was going to be very hard to pick five, but it was actually hard to cut it down to five in the end. That there was that
Mm-hmm.
many different things that you could have used. So it is an option if you want to play that way. Hybrids is just easier. Is if you want to get up the ranks or you want to get up the arenas, hybrids is the way to go. But you can have fun with non-hybrids too.
I just want to chime in and say I agree with pretty much that whole list you rattled off, posts, with probably the exception being Baryonyx. Not a fan of it whatsoever. Just
I think
it
it's
not
super low.
having immunity is a huge detriment to its play. But other thing I wanted to throw out there is, Ludia, if you're listening, please fix Argentinosaurus, because it definitely would have been on my list if we still had 1.2 Argentino.
Yeah, that one really was a shame. So yeah. Anyways, of what I mean, I guess what they could do to to make non-hybrids a bit better is just a third move, because that would really help. Because a lot of these dinos, like when we're, for example, if we're comparing Tyrannosaurus with Tyrannosaurus is miles better, but if it had like a third move to help it could probably compete in many aspects. That's it for that category, and that will be our last category. We are running a bit along here. I think it's around an hour, right? Who's keeping time? Is Double keeping time? But anyways, yeah. Just to wrap up, this list, it's not as serious as we kind of make it out to be. It's just a fun subject to talk about. These aren't definite, and they will obviously change with how the meta goes. And these are obviously aren't to building your team. You obviously want diversity in your team. You have to fill your roles and such. So just like the tier list, don't take this too seriously. I thought it was just a really fun discussion to have. Just looking at each rarity, which ones are better, and obviously these are only our opinions. And feel free to comment down below what your lists are, and see how similar or different they are to us or ours. And anyways, another programming note: we probably will be putting out Metaminutes on weekdays instead of weekends. So if you guys are just driving to work or going to school on bus or whatever, you could just listen to them instead of weekends where you have more time to other leisure activities. So anyways, but that's all we got for this week. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Tell us what you think about this. Our topics. Next week we're probably going to talk about either the tournament or the tier list, so stay tuned for that, and we'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.
See ya.